Joining us today on the pod is Amanda Rolph. And just like me, Amanda is an ex-teacher. And also like me, she very much used to lead a sensible life until one day she stepped away from it all and decided to homeschool her son and start her own business. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Rosie. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah. I'm really excited for this conversation. And I guess the little bit I said just before is talking about the what you did and what you do now. But I know that neither of us are really keen on that question, what do you do? So I want to start with the question, and it's a pretty big question, so we'll see how we go. But who are you? If you had to describe who you are, where would you start?
Oh, I like that question. That is a good one. Who am
Awesome.
I? I'm Amanda. I love gardening. I have an allotment. I also love growing my own flowers. I love dahlias.
Yeah.
I am very sensitive, very compassionate. I'm a busy mum to two highly sensitive children that I home educate. And I work as like a shamanic healer and intuitive coach for women.
Very cool. Thank you. Yeah. Can you share with us how did you become a teacher? Like I feel like all of us teachers, whether we're still teaching now or not, there's a story as to how we became a teacher and for what reasons.
Yeah. And it's interesting actually because it kind of ran in my family. So my mum,
Right.
she was like a nursery nurse, and her mum was a teacher. Um, and so I kind of fell into it in a sense. And I remember when I was 16 and we did work experience, it's quite common here in the UK at that age. And I got placed in a primary school.
Mm.
And I remember I was there for the whole week, but I thought, gosh, this is really hard work. I don't want to do this. And I remember when we went back into school, I had to give a talk to my English class to
Mm.
talk about my week. And I remember saying, I don't want to be a teacher.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so I went on to do my exams and I went into sixth form and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And we had these careers consultations. And for a while, I thought about nursing. I knew I wanted to do a job that helped people.
Right.
And I think even that is actually something that we could unpick
Yeah.
for me as a
Yeah.
bit of a kind of chronic people pleaser, putting everyone else's needs first. But anyway, so I was like, well, maybe I'll do nursing. So I left school and went to college to start this sort of basic nursing course. And I remember that I got there and they said, oh, we don't actually do that course. It's called something else and da da da. But as part of that, I got put on a placement looking after young children in a nursery. And
Mm.
whilst I was there, several of the staff said to me, you're so good with the children. You should be a teacher. And I just came home one day and I thought, I'm just going to apply to uni.
Yeah.
And that was that. That's how I
Wow.
became a teacher. So, yeah, I guess, ignored it for quite a while, but ultimately that's what I fell into.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it's similar for me. You know, people say, oh, yeah, I think you'd be good at that. And you just kind of go along with it. But I want to go back to what you said about people pleasing, because when we first met, you mentioned that, you know, the fact that you wanted to do a job that helped people really played into some of those people pleasing wounds. Okay. Can you unpack for us what exactly you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. I think I was reflecting on it recently about all those years in teaching. And obviously, I don't know about your school system, but like over here in the UK, it's very pressured. You know, there's often lesson observations and you're given a
Mm-hmm.
grade and you always want to be at the best grade. And we're looking at the pupil's progress and how can we, get them to do better. And I realized for someone like me who is like a recovering perfectionist, always striving to get something outside of myself, in that sense, the job was never done. I could never say it was truly
Yeah.
finished. There was always
Mm-hmm.
something else to be done. And I think I'm just curious how I ended up in that job. And because I think, for example, now, like me as my mature self, if I was in that position of choosing a new job, I don't think I'd choose teaching now.
Interesting. What would you choose now?
Oh, that's a good question. I think something where I had lots of time on my own, perhaps where I could sit in an office and stare out of the window.
Yeah.
And daydream and drink tea and maybe have my own time to like write in my journal or just be with my thoughts.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's not much time for that in teaching, is there?
No, definitely not. Can you share with us? You told me a story, I'm not going to give it away, when you were teaching and you were lying on the bathroom floor. Talk us through what that time was like and why on earth were you lying on the bathroom floor?
Sure. Before I came on today, I was just sitting and reflecting on a few points that I wanted to share to get across to my story. And I realised that there was an event in my life where everything just flipped on its head. And this was leading up to that. So I always worked in early years with young children, which actually I loved because I think young children are just fantastic. They're so full of life. They're so full of energy. In so many ways, I loved it. And yet it was exhausting. You know, it's not a natural social model, I don't think, to have 1 to 2 adults with maybe 30 4 and 5 year olds. You know, it's just not a natural thing. And when I became pregnant with my eldest child, obviously I was still teaching 5 days a week. And I remember being so tired that when it was break time in the morning, so I had a 10-minute or 15-minute tea break, I would take my coat and I would go and lie on the floor of the staff toilet and shut the door, and I would lie down for 15 minutes because I was just beyond exhausted, I think physically and emotionally. And I look back now and I think, wow, I used to really betray myself, my body. I feel sad actually when I talk about it that I used to lie on the floor of the toilet because I needed a rest.
Yeah. I mean, like that's not how life should be, right? The fact that you ended up in that position it's heartbreaking. And I think a lot of teachers are struggling because, like you say, the job's never done. And it's very much a job where you're overgiving and there's just a total lack of boundaries.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know, did you think that was normal at the time? Did you know something was off?
That's a good question. I think I've always known that I'm a more tired person. And I say that in inverted commas, like I was diagnosed with celiac disease at 19. So I think actually my whole life, my body's been trying to tell me enough's enough. So I think for me, I just normalised it. I'd normalised being exhausted and, you know, always feeling tired and having to push beyond what my body could do. So I think, and I just was far less conscious of myself at that time in my life. I was very much on that treadmill of you go to school, you get your qualifications, you go to uni, you get a job, buy a house, all those things. A bit like your story. But then you wake up one day and think, hang on a minute, actually, I'm not very happy here.
It takes us a while to get there sometimes.
Yes.
Was there a tipping point for you where the light switch went on and you went, whoa, what am I doing?
So I kind of had 2 in my life. So the key point where everything almost fell apart, but I didn't have the realizations in that moment of what needed to change, was when I had my son, when he was born. And his birth was a difficult experience. And I was very poorly afterwards, like very, very poorly, you know, touch and go poorly. And that, it was just like my whole life and everything I knew and thought and believed just kind of crumbled in front of my eyes. And I was left feeling really lost. I think I didn't know how to navigate that. So that was very much a wake-up call as to, you know, what you've been doing isn't working anymore. And also what I found, because ironically, before I had children, I thought that my job was to like live my life, have my children, and then just devote myself to being a mother. Right. And it wasn't long into the journey. And I thought, yeah that's not going to work. Oh, no. I can't erase myself here, which is, I thought, is probably what I thought I would do. So that was very much one time. But I also remember then several years later, this was a far more like gentle experience, but I was just sat on my sofa in the lounge one day and I thought, I'm 33 years old. And I thought, how the fuck did I get here? Like, I just sat there looking around my house at my life and thought, how has all this happened? And I've been like so unaware and unconscious of so much of it. And I just really realized, like, if you don't choose to become more conscious and present with everything that's happening, you're going to get to 60, 70 years old and look back and go, oh, like, that's a lot of my life has literally passed me by. So I remember that being quite significant as well. Like one of those quiet moments. It was quite unremarkable, but it was really profound, like the realization that I had.
Yeah. For me, I don't think I had one moment, but over time, similar thoughts, right? Like, whoa,
Yeah.
what is this what it's going to be like for the rest of my life? Is this the kind of life I want to lead? And, in the past, it's been a resounding no. And it's kind of like, well, and I want to hear your thoughts and if you agree. But for me, it felt like, okay, I need to put myself first to be able to make these changes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think for me, and it's like a cliche, but for so many years, it just feels like you're on a treadmill or you're just doing it because the teachers told you or your parents told you or society told you, or perhaps actually no one even told us that we have to do these things. It's just the expectation is so deeply ingrained that it's
Yeah.
just what you do. And then you start thinking, well, hang on a minute, what if I don't want to do that?
Yeah.
I'd be curious if you're happy to share like one of your experiences of that like realization of what
I
the hell's
feel
going
like
on.
I I've had so many. It's a lesson that I'm constantly relearning. I get caught up in the day to day, and I really resonate with this people pleasing thing. One example I can think of is, I only did my teaching career for 2 years, right? I didn't last long, but I did it. Like I started the teaching degree because people said you'd be a good teacher, you work well with children, you get holidays, all these wonderful things about teaching. And so I just kind of went along with it. I did enjoy working with kids and I do like helping people. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'll go along. Absolutely hated the degree. I was angry all the time. It was infuriating. And then, you know, I got into this excellence program and got full time, employment, guaranteed employment. And everybody was really proud of me. So I was, feeling really good. But within the first couple of months, I knew I didn't want to do it. I just thought, what the heck is this? Like, I felt part of the problem because I have a lot of opinions on the school system. I'm sure you do too, which we can dive into later. But even though I knew a couple of months in, I didn't leave for 2 years. It took me 2 years. And I only left because my mental and physical health got so bad I just couldn't continue. So I left it that long. And it's because I didn't listen to myself and trust that and just leave. All the voices around me were saying, just see it through. You've only just started. Don't throw it all away. Persevere, hustle, hustle. So that was definitely a significant moment for me. I got caught up in it and pleasing others. But when I left, it just felt so liberating. It's an amazing feeling. What were the emotions you were going through when you left teaching for good?
Well, it's funny actually. So I think I taught for about 8 years before I went on maternity leave with my
Right.
eldest. And I knew once I'd gone back to work that I did not want to go back full time. So after he was born, I went back like a day and a half a week. So in that sense, I'd massively stepped out of it.
Why do you think it took you all that time to actually acknowledge that you were really good at teaching?
I think perhaps because when you're in the job, and again, it's just the constant barrage of how could you improve this? How could you improve this lesson? How can these children make better progress? You know, yada, yada, yada. You're just on that treadmill of constant self improvement. And I think perhaps I did know, like a part of me may have known you're good at this.
Mm-hmm.
But a bit like you said, when you're then in that system, there's almost not room to really flourish in your own
Right.
unique way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it literally wasn't until I was hugging my colleagues to say goodbye and I knew I'd be walking out and not coming back.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, you've been really good at this job.
Yeah.
And I've kind of vowed in that moment that going forward in whatever I did, I would never allow myself to be like that again, that I would acknowledge my goodness and what I was doing in the moment all the time. I thought, this is never going to happen again, that, you know, that we realise right at the very end.
Yeah. But I think a lot of us can probably relate to that. And it's kind of heartbreaking that that happens. So I'd love to know, how have you got better at acknowledging how great you are?
Oh, well, it's still something I kind of find difficult, but I think because now I'm much more led by how I feel, my body,
Mm-hmm.
like my body's
Mm-hmm.
capabilities, my intuition. So I'm naturally a lot more in tune with myself. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm a lot more compassionate with myself. So I'm much better at being like, oh, you have done a really good job of that. And then also being compassionate if perhaps things haven't gone how I wished them to go.
We've got this thing in Australia called tall poppy syndrome. I don't know if that's a term you use over there, but it's sort of, I'm trying to think of a simple definition of it. It's essentially, we don't want to talk ourselves up or say that we're good at something.
Yes.
What is that about?
Or we could unpick that really deeply, I
Yeah,
think,
let's
couldn't
go
we?
deep. Yeah.
Especially as women,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a massive stigma actually about saying, like, waving your hand, saying, actually, hi, yeah, I'm really good at that.
Yeah.
You know, I can help, or I'm really good at this. I think for me, especially growing up, it's like, well, don't be a show off, you know, don't boast,
Mm,
don't be arrogant, don't brag. And so for me, naturally, I've always downplayed everything that I've done.
mm-hmm.
You know, I remember when I went to university, in the end, I got like a first class degree and I got like a university prize because I think, I don't know,
Wow.
I just got the highest graded degree in my cohort of like 100 people. But
Mm.
again, I was like, oh, don't talk about that.
Mm.
You know, don't talk about that.
Mm.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? That I think we naturally are quite maybe hard on ourselves, but quite dismissive as well of the things that we're good at and our
Mm.
achievements.
Mm. It's amazing some of the similarities we have, because I studied an MBA and same thing. We called it valedictorian at our university, but there was almost this shame around it, and even now when I share it with people, I sort of just quickly say it and bumble over my words and move on rather than owning that achievement.
Mm,
And it's baffling to me. But I
mm,
really think you have a good point about it being more of an issue for women, because when I think about it, a lot of men have no issues with just talking about all their accolades and I'm good at this and I can do that. And often they're not questioned on that.
it made me think there's a quote, and I'm sure it's Nicki Minaj said, when a man is assertive, he's a boss. But when a
Mm-hmm.
woman is assertive, she's a bitch. And so I
Mm,
do think there's a lot of like societal conditioning. And I think for a lot of us as well, it's probably like a little inner child part of us that's
yeah.
thinking, oh, don't show off because nobody will like you.
Right. Yeah.
Mm,
It feels like a huge risk.
yes.
It's
Yeah.
terrifying. I know it's something I'm continuously working on. Like, just own it. You know, I'm even uncomfortable now, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm a wonderful person, right? And I should just own that. And just like you were a wonderful person, we need to put that out in the world. Maybe we wouldn't use those words, but
we could.
let's
Yeah.
exactly, we could, and there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with it. Yeah.
I think in time, as like for me, having gotten older and with all the things that I've been through, I am a lot better now at being like, yeah, do you know what? You've really got your ducks in a row most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
You are a good person. Like you've got your shit together on the whole. Yeah, like give yourself a pat on the back because really you're doing okay.
Right. Yeah. And something that I think ties into that is our inner voice. I know my inner voice is so freaking cruel. It's just, I would never talk to someone else the way I can talk to myself sometimes. Why do you think that happens? Because I don't think I'm alone with that.
No, that is a good question. And actually, that's one thing I would say that I've managed to shift that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it was what makes me think of that is when I gave birth to my son. And after it's about 2.5, 3 hours later, and I remember lying there in the hospital bed thinking, or like it was like I knew, like my intuition, something's wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
it was like I had a conversation with two different parts of myself, or like an argument, because there was this part of me saying, something's really wrong. And in my
Mm-hmm.
head, I was saying, oh, no, 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 come on. You've just had a baby. He was a big baby. You had intervention, da 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 da. What did you expect? Basically, pull yourself together. And there was
Mm.
still this little voice going, no, something's really wrong. And eventually, when they got me up and tried to put me on a chair or whatever they were going to do, and I collapsed. And that's when everyone
Wow.
realised, oh, she's really ill. So I
Yeah.
knew. And that day I ignored my inner voice, you know, but almost
Mm.
with catastrophic consequences. And so I
Yeah.
think since then, I'm much better at listening now because I know the potential risk of not. Um, but I think going back to that, like the inner critic, people talk about that, don't they?
Yeah.
That the archetype of the inner critic. Sometimes I think it's maybe all the voices of, sadly, parents, teachers, just influential
Mm-hmm.
figures in society. How much have we heard? I'm really conscious, even with my own children at the moment. So, like, it's the middle of winter here, it's cold, I'm tired. Naturally, in the winter, I just want to curl up in an armchair, stare at the fire with a cup of tea. But I can't always
Mm-hmm.
do that because, the kids are about and they want to play and make things. And one thing I've noticed is sometimes my inner voice kind of coming up and starting to be a bit like berating me a little bit for not being a good enough mum. The children want to
Mm.
play, they want to do this, and yet I haven't got the energy. But I'm much better now at trying to hold both of those things. Like I talk a lot about like holding two things, that two things can be true. And,
Mm-hmm.
on the one hand, yes, they probably would like to play with me more, and I could be more like Mary Poppins, da da da. But on the other
Yeah.
hand, it is winter, and I have limited resources energetically, and that's
Mm.
also going to play a part. Uh, so I think sometimes with the inner critic, it's almost, I don't know, I would listen to them and be like, no, I hear what you're saying, but this is how we're going to do things today.
Yeah. We're not going to be able to get rid of that inner critic, I
No.
don't think, but we just acknowledge it and go, nah, you're wrong. I'm going to do this anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And I think so much with that kind of work, often people are very keen to push it away and almost make it
Right.
wrong, like make them the enemy.
Mm.
And I find when you do that, they just, if anything, it just gets louder. Like sometimes
Mm.
you almost need to be like, okay, well, yeah, I'm listening, and I see why you might think that, but actually, that's not the case. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is what we're going to do today.
Mm. Mm. And that voice, I think, you mentioned this before, is very much based on how we've been conditioned by the people in our lives, by society. And we think they're our thoughts, but often it's the beliefs and thoughts, expectations of other people that we've just kind of accepted as our own because it becomes so ingrained. And I think a big journey for me And something I encourage everybody to do is just question. Ask the question, like, is that true? Is that actually my belief? Or is that just something that I've been told that's the way it is? You got to do it this way. You can't do it any other way. Because often those thoughts, they're not all my own. It's external. And then when you listen to your gut or your intuition, there's different names for it. I really think wonderful things happen when you listen to that. And like you said, it's often a quiet voice. So you need to give yourself space to be able to let it in, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like, for me as well, when I was very much living in like automatic mode, so like before I had my son, and I was just doing all the socially acceptable things, but I was very unconscious, as to who I was, what I wanted, what did I feel, all those things. I think when you're living in that very automatic way, I think often the thoughts, feelings, the voices, like you say, I don't think they're necessarily ours. It could just be just the general chatter of everything and
Right.
everyone around you.
Is there a magic pill to get better at this? Tell me the solution.
No, I think there's not. I was like, how am I going to phrase this? I think it's almost like it's an ongoing process, isn't it? Because I
Yeah.
think the temptation is, and often we're sold it as, do this healing, like the shiny thing, the shiny object, and then your life will be magically better. But for me, it's more like having a really tangled ball of threads, and you start to unravel one, and then that leads to another one, which leads to another one, and it's just ongoing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's off-putting to some people because I know I'm guilty of it. I just want a quick solution. Sometimes I just go, oh, it's too hard. It's too hard. I'm not going to do that. But actually, when you do the hard work, sometimes it does get a little bit worse before it gets better. But when you do that work, I just think life gets better and you really tap into your true self. So anybody listening who's a bit stubborn, give it a go.
Yeah, definitely. Because I was talking about this at like a speaking event I went to recently. Like, I would say that I am living my best life, but that doesn't look like a shiny Instagram, ooh, look at my best life. It actually looks like very quiet, lots of quiet days, lots of drinking hot chocolate in pajamas. It looks like not having to be bound by an alarm clock waking me up every day. Very much centers peace and joy, but not in the woohoo, we're all having such a great time, but just a quieter sense of joy and peace. Yeah, definitely.
Let's jump back to education because I want to hear more. What was it like when you sent your eldest to school for the first time?
So I remember, and again, it was one of those things, wasn't it? You just do it. Everyone goes to school. And we were fortunate that we found, obviously, I worked in the area and we went round several of the schools. And I found one that I thought, yeah, this is really lovely. And I think he'll do well here. It's quite small. The teachers are really kind. So he went to nursery. And I remember on the second day when I had to do the school run thinking, oh, have I got to do this like twice a day, every day for the next however many years? And I really didn't like that, like the idea that our day and our time was bound by like somebody else's timetable. But anyway, he went to nursery part-time, like 3 mornings a week, kind of he could manage. Towards the end, maybe we increased it to 4, and he didn't love it, but it was fine. I think he had a reasonable time when he was there. But then when nursery finished that year and it came to moving into reception, which is like the first year of more like full-time school over here, they'd combine the nursery and reception, his class, together because the numbers were low. So it meant that he'd gone from being 20 children in that classroom to 40.
Whoa.
And his teachers were the loveliest teachers you could ever ask for. Obviously, with me being very much in that job. I thought I couldn't ask for a nicer teacher. But it was clear that he was not coping at all. And she, even she said to me, he is like a meerkat. He is so anxious. We'd come home from school, and like I remember one Friday night, he was like, "Mummy, is it school tomorrow?" No, it's Saturday. What about the next day? No, not the next day. What about the next day? And I thought, wow, you are far too young to be this anxious and worried. And so he only went part-time for like a term, so about 12 weeks. And we didn't go every day because he just couldn't. And I remember it being really difficult because I knew in my heart that that home ed was an option and it would be a good option, because I thought if you keep pushing him to go, what on earth is going to be left of his spirit? Like, you're just going to destroy him. And my youngest sister, actually, she hated school. It didn't do her any favours being made to go. And as it got towards the very end, like we'd be walking to school one day and I was walking to work, and my dad was with us because he was taking the kids on. And my little boy just got off the buggy board and sat down on the grass in the rain and cried. And I just said to my dad, just take him home. Just take him home. And that was it, pretty much. Thankfully, his teachers, they were really supportive because they saw that he was not thriving at all. Yeah, and that's, again, I was reflecting before we came on here today, and I was thinking about all those big decisions I've made in my life. It's never been oh, yes, I'm a 100% yes. It's always been, there's been doubts, there's been tears, but like there's just something inside of you that it's the right thing to do, but it's also a hard thing to do. And so I guess for anyone that's listening as well, that perhaps they're on the cusp of maybe making that big decision, or they just know in their bones that there's a big decision to be made and potentially something really exciting beyond that, then it's normal to feel grief. I think often when we make these big decisions, I remember the day we took my little boy out of school, and all his little friends were waving. They were like, "Bye, Oliver." And he'd always struggled socially with making friends. And of course you're thinking, am I doing the right thing? He seems really popular, and all the voices in your head. And I was sad for all the school plays that I wouldn't get to see, and the things I enjoyed about teaching, like all the school fates and the community. And I thought, you're not going to have that. Little did I know that now we're home ed, we've got it so much more so.
Wow.
That sense of community and things. But it wasn't an easy decision, but it also was completely the right decision. As we drove away from school that day, and it was just a grey, quite unremarkable day, my husband said to me, like, "You want proof we've done the right thing?" And there was just this huge rainbow in the sky in front of us.
Oh,
so
wow. Did it feel natural to make that decision to take your son out of reception?
I'm going to say no, actually. And when you were talking, what kind of came up was, for me, it was almost like, this is a huge responsibility that I can make this decision. And I think perhaps, and I know on my personal journey, I've realised that using my power has been often an issue, and I've often felt powerless. So I think in terms of natural, maybe it didn't feel natural. I think it felt uncomfortable because I realised this was a really powerful position to be in, because you're making a big decision that will impact his life and all of ours. So it wasn't, I knew it was right. I just knew.
Yeah.
But also it felt very uncomfortable.
I think that's such an important point. It's often not comfortable. That's quite normal to feel that way. And I would go so far as to say that when you're having those feelings of doubt and discomfort and really questioning the decision, it's often a sign that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And a sign that you're considering all the aspects, because I don't think there's anyone that jumps into big life-changing decisions in a both feet, eyes closed, yes, I'm 100% in. And I think perhaps the people that do that, maybe then in time they come to realise that, oh, it's not what I thought
Yeah.
it would be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me more about homeschooling.
So when we first began, so this was actually, it's about 5 years ago now. 5 years, 4 years, 4 years ago that we started. And in the beginning, I remember thinking, oh, well, I'm a teacher. I'm going to do all these plans. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, I thought I'd recreate my job at home.
Right.
And I quickly realised that actually I wasn't going to do that because it just wasn't going to work for us. And again, it was one of these examples where it just didn't feel aligned. It felt like I was pushing almost against the tide. And so actually, we kind of just relaxed more into life. But this was just pre all the lockdowns and things. So we only had a
Mm.
couple of months of being home ed, and we'd found like a learning co-op to go to, and we were just beginning to find our feet, and obviously then everything closed. And so
Wow.
then for several months there wasn't really anything to do. So the beginning of our journey was perhaps not usual, but I think it was also good because I guess it gave us time to settle more
Mm-hmm.
into,
Mm-hmm.
and we went back to, just finding what is it that we all love to do, finding time for hobbies or and being together. And it's interesting when we took Oliver out of school, because I hadn't perhaps fully realised, I guess you wouldn't until you do it, the impact that it would have on all of us. And you just start to
Mm.
think, actually, yeah, why do kids have to learn to do this by this age, and who
Mm.
actually set all those requirements, and who
Uh-huh.
decided the curriculum, and but why, and again it's all those questions, like you said, when you start asking why, and the more you ask why, the more things unravel themselves. And so yeah, in time we started to like settle in and find a bit of a rhythm. But it wasn't until we made quite a big move. Well, I say big, obviously this is the UK, so it's only like 2 hours, but it feels like a long way. I'm sure for you,
Yeah.
you're thinking that's not that far. But we moved to Norfolk, and here we found like our community and lots of friends and lots of groups and activities. So it's great. But yeah, so it took us some time. We definitely had to like readjust and heal,
Mm-hmm.
actually, is what comes to mind. I think we all had to, like my son, from the anxiety of being at school, and me perhaps of being in such a, because I mean, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but I'm guessing similar, like very set term times, holidays, the
Yep.
routine, such a structure. And I realized, obviously I'd been to school, then I'd been to uni, then I went straight into teaching, so my entire life had been defined by those chunks of time, you know, like counting down to the next holiday and how long was this
Yeah.
term. So it just gave us time to settle, and like Sundays then stopped becoming a day that would provoke anxiety, because you're like, oh, well, it's just Sunday.
Yeah.
There's nothing to
Yeah.
dread about Monday. But yeah, it definitely took time.
Yeah. And you mentioned community.
Mm.
I think there's so much power in community. And I really think it's an essential piece of the puzzle for us to be able to fully embrace what it is we truly want to do. So how did finding your community, because you mentioned once you moved to Norfolk that you found your community and you started
Mm.
making friends. So what difference did that make?
That, yeah, I mean, that it was everything. But I remember when we moved, I had to be quite disciplined, because I was like, right, we're new here, we don't know anybody, so we need to make an effort, like we need to put ourselves
Right.
out there. And I remember just finding online, like there was a meet up at a park not too far away, and at this point I didn't have a car, so I took like both the kids, the buggy, all the stuff, the scooter, on the bus down the road
Wow.
to Norwich, and I didn't know where we were going, so I was looking on Google Maps on my phone to look to know what bus stop to get off at. And then it was like a mile walk to the park, but we
Wow.
did it, and we went that day, and actually we met several people who've gone on to become really good friends. And not just that the
Mm.
children are friends, but that I'm also friends with their parents, like genuine
Mm-hmm.
friends. So that was a really key part of it. But yeah, it did involve really having to put myself out there. But no, and also I think I took the pressure off, because I was like, look, you can go to these things, and if you meet people and they're not your cup of tea, they're not your cup of tea. That's fine. Like, also putting the pressure on, like, you don't have to find a group of like amazing best friends. You can just find someone that for now you enjoy chatting to, you can share a cup of tea with, that kind of thing. But yeah, and I think perhaps for us with home ed, and to be fair, our experience isn't everybody's experience. Like, I think depending on where you live, everyone has a different experience. But what we found is so lovely for us as adults is that we've made genuine friendships with a lot of the other adults that we meet in the home ed community. So when we go to like groups or activities, days out, for us it's really nourishing as well, because we're chatting, seeing our friends, the children are seeing their friends. And you're right, it is almost building that community that I like, that everyone so desperately needs. And I think more than ever, like, just I've been talking to a few of my friends recently and reaching out, and I've come to the conclusion that actually not many people are okay. People are struggling.
Right.
And I put myself in that category as well, just with everything that's happening in the world and financial pressures. And I just feel like everyone's feeling that, aren't they? Or I don't, maybe perhaps I'm speaking for myself, but be interested to know what you think.
Totally agree. And for some reason, we've been conditioned to believe that we can't admit that we're not okay. That's a sign of weakness. How dare you? Just suck it up. On you go. Push through. Have some grit. And I think that is so unhealthy.
Yeah.
It doesn't usually end well. And you mentioned, at the beginning of the episode, that your body was kind of giving you signs that, well, something's not right here. You're doing the wrong thing. Hold up. And we often don't listen to that.
Yeah.
And it bites us in the bum.
Yeah, big time. Also, as well, perhaps we feel like that we don't really have a choice to listen. I just internalized or believed, oh, well, I'm just a really tired person. I need more rest. I'm almost like making up all these excuses
Yeah.
as to why I couldn't function like most normal, in inverted commas, people function. And actually, now I look back and I'm like, my poor body was just holding so much that she was like, no, enough.
How do we get better at not making these bullshit excuses? Because I really think they are bullshit, right? I think in the moment, we don't acknowledge that they're excuses. We see it as the truth, and this is the only option. So how do we begin to challenge that?
When you were talking, the word that came to me actually was vulnerability. And it's almost like an invitation for everyone to get really comfortable or to practice being vulnerable in front of other people. And then I know actually, for a lot of us, myself included, that potentially is not going to be easy, and it might not even feel safe, depending on all the
Right.
experiences that we've had, like at home with our parents, growing up with friends, at school. It's a risk to be vulnerable because,
Yeah.
people could be really hurtful to you. But it's like, I know we spoke at the beginning, my beloved cat died a couple of weeks ago, bless her. She got polycystic kidney disease. So we knew that was coming. But when it happened, I was shocked at how like upset and raw the grief was. But in that moment, I was like, well, if I need to basically hibernate for the whole of December and cancel all my plans and stay at home and just cry, then that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
And I really allowed myself, to cry when I needed to cry, put music on that helped me like tap into the grief and cry. And actually, after about 4 days, I thought, oh, I feel a lot. Better's not the right word. You know what I mean? Like, the grief doesn't feel so heavy and painful. But,
Right.
we turned up to a group and my friend was like, oh, how are you? Are you okay? And I just cried and said, no, I'm not. Like, I really was almost having to practice that, being honest and being vulnerable, saying, no, I'm not okay. I'm really sad. But then I noticed by doing that, it's just made the whole process just so much easier, because I allowed myself to just be. and I didn't try and hide behind anything. Because when I was little, I would always try and hold my emotions in. And then actually what would happen is if I got upset about something, an hour later, I'd still be like, you know,
Yeah.
because I'm trying to hold it in so much. Whereas now I'm like, nope, that's coming out. And then I think because I can do that, then it passes through much more quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the so-called excuses that a lot of us tell ourselves is that saying out loud is going to make it a bigger problem.
Yes.
So we've got to keep it in. But like you said, from my experience, when I do share it, when I am honest and vulnerable, I don't quite know the right word, but it's almost liberating.
Yeah.
You're sharing how you truly feel with somebody. And by saying it out loud, you're like, oh, yeah, I do feel that way. I feel shit, actually. I'm
Yes.
not all right. And it's out there. Because I'm awful at this. I'm still working on it. But someone will say, oh, how are you doing? Are you okay? I'll say, yep, I'm good. And move on. Even sometimes with close friends. And it's like, actually, no, I'm not okay. I'm really having a freaking hard time. And saying it out loud doesn't mean I want the person to solve it. That's not going to happen. I just want somebody to listen. I want to feel heard.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important part of living, just to feel like you have a voice and to be heard.
Yes, definitely. And I wonder, I think sometimes, and I know for myself anyway, my experience is that perhaps it was almost like at its deepest level, I didn't feel worthy of taking up people's time and attention and love. So it's just easier to be fine. I
Right.
had a really good acronym for that at this speaking event I was at a few weeks ago, and I can't remember what it was, but it was. I'll have to see if I can share it with you afterwards,
Yeah, yeah.
because it was super appropriate. But yeah, I wonder if it taps into, I don't know, a sense of a lack of self-worth, perhaps at its deepest. But when, I've noticed, perhaps you've noticed, when we are vulnerable and we're able to say, I'm not okay, it's almost like it gives people around us permission to say, oh, well, neither am I, actually, if we're being honest here.
Right.
Do you find
Yeah,
that? Like it, yeah.
absolutely. It kind of opens the floodgates and makes it okay to talk about it. It makes us feel less alone, I think. Because as you said earlier, a lot of us aren't okay. We're having a
Yeah.
really hard time,
Yeah.
but that is okay. And that is, in inverted commas, normal. This is part of being
Yes.
human.
Yeah. Most definitely.
Let's switch topics now because a big part of your journey was you starting a business. You're a
Yes.
healer and a coach. But how did that happen? You're a mother, you were teaching in the school system, you then, took your eldest out of school, and obviously your other child isn't in school either now. So you were homeschooling, all these things. So how did you make this jump? What happened?
Oh, well, I think so much of it stemmed from after I had my little boy and I was so poorly. And that almost, I guess you could describe it as like a mental health crisis. I was very poorly afterwards. I think the shock of what had happened physically, like combined with becoming a new mum, but then having to deal with all that on top. I was very, very unwell physically and then mentally. But there was just something in me. I could have gone to my doctor and they could have given me antidepressants, but I knew that that was like sticking a plaster over a
Right.
freely bleeding wound. And I was really motivated to be better for my son because like I wanted to be a good mum to him and I wanted to be present and enjoy him. And so I found like it set off this real, I don't know, determination in me that I would go about healing this rather than just trying to like, I don't know, put a sticking plaster on it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like for a lot of people, if that's what you need and that's what works, then that's good and I celebrate that. But there was just something in me that thought, no, I need to like find out what's at the root here. And so I turned to all sorts of like holistic modalities. I have Reiki, like learnt meditation, sound healing. I went to women's circle. I started going to like a shamanic healing group. And over time, then I did all this work, like shadow work, inner child work, all this parts work. And I started to become much more like conscious and aware of myself and how all these experiences in my life actually, I always liken it to, it's like, it's like you go through life and someone's like, oh, this, you should wear this coat. It really suits you. Oh, look, here's a coat. You should put this one on. Like it suits you. And you get to a point where you think, hang on a minute. I don't like any of these. Why am I, because like people tell you, oh, you're so mature. You're so da-da-da. You're such a good listener. And then you get to the point of thinking, yeah, but hang on, who am I in all this? And what do I want? And so, and this was like a process going on over years. And then I had my daughter and that added another layer into the healing aspect. And then I worked with like a shamanic healer and a teacher and a mentor quite extensively over the course of several years. And I just learned so much about myself. And I realized that also, like naturally, I was quite predisposed to this and had a very strong sense of intuition. And I realized that I could take all my experiences and what happened to me and use that to support other women and to support people who perhaps were like me once upon a time and support them now. So when we moved to Norfolk and I left my job in schools, because obviously physically, I can't commute 2 hours to get there. Yeah. And I thought I could go back into teaching or go back into supply teaching. And I knew my heart wasn't in it, especially then being home educating my own children. I thought you're not really in your integrity in going into a classroom, because by this point, I don't think it's great that the children spend so much time inside and they spend so much time sitting down and they spend so much time being expected to write when they're too young and it's not developmentally appropriate. So I thought, well, it's not really an option, let's be honest. Yeah. It would pay the bills, but it's not really what I want to do. Or the invitation is like, well, now that you're in a place where I've done a lot of deep healing work and I'm coming out the other side, and the invitation is, okay, so how can you use all this now to go forward and help other people?
So had you ever had a business prior to this?
I was about to go, oh no, but I realised like there was a couple of things I used to do. When I was teaching, I also did some extra tutoring. Again, when I look back at that now, I'm like, why? Why did you do that? You were so tired. You were working so hard and yet you just did more work. So I'd done that before, and I'd worked with a friend for a while doing some mindfulness for children. So I had, but they were always more like additions to a main job, if that makes sense. Rather than with this, I was like, well, it's time to go all in, as it were.
So how do you juggle being a mother? What's the right word? I don't know if you'd say you're a teacher to your kids or what word you would use. And being an entrepreneur. How do you manage being those three different things?
Often not very well. I want to be really super transparent about this. There's not some magic formula. It's really important for me. I always knew that, like with my business, I don't want to work more than a few hours a week because I want to be around for my family and the children. I want it to be like a part-time job that nourishes us and is a good balance. My husband works as a nurse. So basically on some of his off days, like I might say to him, I'm going to take a couple of hours. You can take the children swimming. So we definitely don't have it down, but I'm quite lucky with my work that it feels like almost quality time for myself as well. So when I sit down to work, like I'll put nice music on, I'll light candles. It's a really nice space. So it's quite restful and nourishing anyway. So I'm grateful in that sense, because working can also feel like me time as well.
Yeah, it's possible, right? I think a lot of us think that's not even a thing. You know, you just have to do the 9 to 5, the daily grind. That's the way life is. You can't love your job. Don't you dare love your job. It's possible. I think we all need to dream a little bit more and take a chance. You know, you just said that your work brings you joy. It's time for yourself. And that's beautiful. And I think more people need to explore that. We can have a better life.
Yeah, definitely. And it's often tapping into like the skills and the gifts that you possess and knowing how they can be used to support other people. But I do feel really fortunate. But also, I feel like I've reached a point in my life and with my body where I couldn't do it any differently anymore. There is no way now I could be setting an alarm every day and waking myself
Mm.
up before I'm ready. I mean, I've got a 5-year-old, so I'm usually up before I'm ready. But there's none of this rush, morning routines, getting it,
Mm-hmm.
rushing out the door. And it feels really nourishing. Like I often work in the evenings because I just
Mm-hmm.
quite like that time, and that works well in terms of family rhythm and routine. So, and it's one of those things, isn't it, that you can look and think, oh, I could never do that. And how do you do it? But then when you stop on reflection, you think, well, actually, yeah, I can do that if I want to, because I don't have to do all these things. I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
work full time in this job. Obviously financially issues come into play, but I do
Mm.
wonder for many people, actually, you can stop and ask yourself, do I need to do this, or can I have a bit more freedom and flexibility and do something that suits me?
Mm. Yeah. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier. Ask why more and kind of unpack these excuses that you're coming up with. I mean, sometimes, there's valid things to consider. You just mentioned financial obligations before, and that is a very real thing. And all of
Yeah.
us are at a different stage. But a lot of us are also making excuses about that. I think we all should audit how much we're spending, and are we spending it on things that bring us joy? Obviously, there's basics like, food and shelter, but what else are you spending money on? And do you need to? Do you need all these possessions? For me, I recently moved into my van full time. It was really hard at the time to choose what to bring in the van, but I got rid of 99% of my possessions. And guess what? I don't miss any of it.
Yeah,
So, you know,
definitely.
yeah.
Sometimes I like to play that game in my house and I look around. I think if I was moving into a caravan, what would I take and what would I like? And I think, well, you'd have to leave a lot of stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
then you realize actually we don't need a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I
And it
think
becomes
again, it's,
clear what's truly important to us.
yeah, definitely. And it's probably quite simple things. But again, isn't it? We've all been conditioned to, you buy a house and then you buy a
Right.
bigger house and then you decorate said house and perhaps you get a new kitchen. And
Mm.
again, it's that stopping to ask, well, why? Like, why do I feel that I should do these things? There's that great phrase, isn't there, about stop shoulding on yourself. And I always now, if I find myself thinking or saying I should, I know
Mm.
that means I don't want to do it.
That's a good one.
Mm,
Yeah. If you're saying I should, that means you don't want to do it. And it's really important to figure out what you want, right? I don't think I'm the same. When I start saying I should, I really am mindful to pull myself up on that. There's nothing forcing me to do it. I just, for some reason, feel all these expectations that I should be doing
yeah.
something. I've been conditioned to think that's the way you need to do things. But do I want to do it? If not, okay, let's figure out how we can find a way to do what I want to do. It might not
Yeah.
happen overnight, but at least if you're moving towards it, you're acknowledging what it is you want from life. I have a bit of a tradition on the podcast. I like to end with the question, what does freedom mean to you?
Ooh, that's a good one. Freedom to me is like my whole body's exhaled freedom to me means having the time to choose what I do, to choose peace, joy, connection with friends and family. It means kind of living my life on my terms, actually.
Yeah, I really resonate with that.
Mm.
And I so love listening to the different responses I get when I ask that question, because freedom means something different to all of us. And that's,
Yeah.
I think, a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And it's funny, at the end, you find yourself thinking, oh, to say like, I want to live my life on my terms. The little voice came in my head of like, wow, you sound really selfish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because again,
Yeah.
it's that conditioning, isn't it? Of, well, it's that realization of actually you do get to choose. And also when you're like you, when you know you're a good person, like a kind person of integrity, I'm like, yeah, actually a life that I choose to live is a really good one, because I'm conscious of other people and my family and the environment. Perhaps we just need to
Yeah.
celebrate ourselves more.
Oh, yes. I find that hard to do, but I
Yeah.
agree. We do need to celebrate ourselves more. We deserve it.
Yeah, oh, definitely. No one else is going
Yeah.
to do it for you.
No, so true. Yep. Yep. You got to fight for yourself, I think. Oh, Amanda, thank you so much for this conversation. It's early morning here and I feel so ready for my day. You've given me so much to think about, and a few of the things, key things that I will go away with are ask why more. That's really important. Ask why. And more than one thing can be true. And I think, particularly for mothers, it's important that you can be more than just a mother.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to get caught up in that. I'm probably making an assumption because I'm not a mother, but I imagine it's so easy to just, your world centers around being a mother, but don't forget who you are.
Yeah, definitely. No, I don't think that's an assumption at all. I was just thinking actually at doing dinner time tonight, because my husband's been at work. He's been on some night shifts, so we've not seen him for several days. And I thought tomorrow I'm going to go and take myself. There's this lovely cafe in these gardens not too far up the road. And I was like, I'm going to go there for a mocha on my own.
Yes.
And I'm going to sit
Yeah.
in the cafe with my notebook and I'm going to watch
Yeah.
people and I'm going to go
Uh-huh.
and enjoy my drink just all by myself.
Yeah. For the listeners, go do something for yourself and
Yeah.
try not to feel guilty about it. I think when we do make time for ourselves, we can show up as a better mother, a better partner, a better friend, whatever it is. I think when we, the term self-care is thrown around a lot, but it's important. We do need to be a little bit selfish
Yeah,
to
definitely.
recharge.
Yeah. Because I can tell at
Yeah.
the moment, like, I need a break and my kids can sense that. So actually, the
Mm,
kindest thing I can do for all of us is to take the break. And then I will come
right.
back with my cup a bit more full
Uh-huh.
to be more joyful for everybody. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing tomorrow.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good. I celebrate that. That's
That.
so good.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Rosie. It's been really nice to chat to you, especially as we have so much in
Yeah.
common as well. It's been really
Yeah.
easy and a good
Good.
flow to the conversation.
Yeah. I've loved it. And I just know that the listeners will come away with so much value from this. So thank you for being so open, so vulnerable, and for sharing so much of your wisdom.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.